Okay, shall we start? Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Transformative Sustainability Financing session. And this is Moogwi Kim, a moderator of this session. And I'm a director at Minerva University Japan, also ESG research expert in Kyoto University, joined by the Mr. James Socas. And maybe you can introduce yourself.
Hi, my microphone's working. James Socas, I'm a managing director and head of climate solutions at Investcorp. And Investcorp is one of the oldest private equity firms. We've been around for about 40 years and do business all around the world, including in Japan, and work closely with Professor Kanie and with Moogwi Kim.
So, okay. So you want to, and I know like everybody know in the area about sustainability, but just in case like some people may not be, know about yourself, so.
Good afternoon, my name is Norichika Kanie. I'm a professor at Keio University. I'm also leading, we call it SDG laboratory at my university. Well, my background is sustainable development, sustainability, and international relations. But these days I do many things related to sustainable development.
Okay, thank you. So before starting, let me explain what will be the key takeaway from this session. Like you are now out of like lunchtime, must be a little bit sleepy, and there's a bunch of good events happening there. But thanks for choosing this session, and you will be rewarded by these three takeaways. One is obviously what is the reality and challenge of sustainability concept like SDGs and ESG. As my research team that I have been conducting extensive research, interviewing nearly 30 and 40 financial institutions leaders asking about their ESG practice and challenge they have been facing. So I'll be touching upon that. And also, Mr. Kanie is a most well-known professor in area of sustainability and also reporting to the United Nations and Japanese government. And he will be touching upon what went well for the SDG and what is the remaining challenge and what comes next is a new sustainability concept that will be discussed later, followed by James Socas that he is one of the leaders in sustainability finance and investing in all sorts of sustainability carbon reduction idea in all over the world. And he'll be touching upon what kind of actual investment idea and business idea and implication to the practitioner, investor, and also policymaker. So hopefully that we can give you some of the, hope you will find some of the lessons that are informative. So starting off the reality of ESG and SDGs, let me start by asking how you evaluate the current achievement of the SDG and the challenge from the SDG, and what went well, what you are not happy about, and what you are proposing to the United Nations to come next generation. Okay, so Mr. Kanie, then how you, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, can I show some slides here? Probably that will help you understanding what I'm talking about. So last year there was, SDG summit held at the UN General Assembly. And the Secretary General of the United Nations mentioned that risk of leaving the SDG behind is getting higher and higher. And we need the rescue plan for the SDGs. So we are at the midpoint for the implementation of the SDGs. It was made in 2015, targeting 2030. And last year was almost the midpoint. But then we realized that it's not really making much progress. And therefore, we need transformation to change this situation. And he pointed out six key areas. 5 of them are included in Sustainable Development Goals, but one issue is not written in the SDGs, which is number 3 written here, digitalization. So digitalization is also a key for transforming our world. As of last year, I was one of the people prepared the Global Sustainable Development Report, which was released last year at UN General Assembly. And our evaluation shows that only 15% has been achieved at the midpoint. So it should be 50 or more than 50%, but it was not. Well, the SDG itself was quite ambitious, so from the outset, it was considered to be quite difficult to achieve. But we realized because of many incidents, unpredicted incidents happened in between 2015 and last year, the progress was really slowed down. And most of them were, well known to us. COVID-19, which impacted quite a lot to economy, but also to work and our lifestyle as well. Climate crisis that comes every year, and we also recognize that even last winter as well. Also, the impact of war was quite significant. So these things are slowing down, or probably I could say that it has negative impact to achieve the SDGs. For example, goal number 1, poverty eradication, is going backwards even in the past years. So progress was zero slow.
Okay, good. Professor, thanks for this quick introduction. So speaking of the SDGs that you have mentioned about this thing, and in terms of good achievement, out of this SDG goal, some of the goal was actually met, right? Which area was unexpectedly done well, particularly?
Well, as you can see here, most of them are not progressing well, but some of them, out of 36 indicators that are shown in this circle, 5 are on track, and those include digitalization or using internet devices. So those areas are making progress. And also, to some extent, partnership initiatives are making some progress.
Very good, thank you. So, speaking of the ESG this time, ESG obviously is a big inflection point. A lot of money has inflow into this asset class in past couple of years. But as you know from last year, there's a big political backlash. And some of the fund is even stopping using the name of the ESG. And some of the ESG score rating agency stopped issuing the ESG score. So here comes question James, how you evaluate the ESG trend and how the ESG concept is evolving in a financial world, which you have been observing?
Yeah, I thank you for the question, and thank you to the Tokyo government for having us and hosting us here. It's a privilege to be here. In the U.S., I think people have seen the stories that there's been a backlash against ESG, which is probably a good thing, although it hasn't perhaps played out as elegantly as it could. ESG, as people know, is environment, social, and governance. And what's happened is the environment, and I'll talk more about that, the environment has become the critical issue. Again, I'll talk about a few statistics. Social has always been problematic because anytime you're trying to, in effect, legislate social policy, you have a backlash against that. That's happening in the United States. And then governance, for a lot of companies, they feel that their job is to govern themselves correctly and properly. So why should the government be telling them how to manage their own business? So there's been a backlash against that. What's happened in the US, and I think it's happened in Japan and in Tokyo, it's really happening around the world, is that people are seeing climate as the critical issue of our time, which I believe, and if you're a young person in the audience, climate is going to be the critical issue, unfortunately for you, for the next several decades. And that's because, again, as people are seeing in their daily lives, we're seeing accelerating warming trends happening around the world. The ocean, which has served as a carbon sink, it's been able to absorb a lot of the heat that's been coming in because of the excess carbon dioxide that's come through fossil fuel emissions. The ocean is reaching its saturation point as a carbon sink, and we're seeing anomalous weather patterns accelerating around the world. Right now, flooding in southern Brazil, heat waves in Southeast Asia, wildfires starting again in Canada, already bringing smoke into the US as happened last year. As those things happen, people look around and they realize that that is the most important thing to focus on. And so the E, environment in ESG, has become primary in the discussions.
Thank you. Do you agree? Yes? But I don't agree. So let me challenge you. This morning when I was riding on the taxi, I was telling to the taxi driver, okay, I have to talk something about the sustainability finance. Are you interested in sustainability of the climate? He replied, yes, I'm very much interested in. And I asked the reason why is that. He replied, okay, so I have a dog. Yeah, but you know, what to relate it with a dog? He said, yeah, having some animal to walking around, I'm very concerned about decrease of the forest area, blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay, so you are very conscious about the, natural protection or something. Well, some of the people are actually very much interested in this, protection of the environment. However, I'm not persuaded at all because there's a much big data. Looking at the past 100 years of a trend, you may observe 1 degree change. But looking at the change from the ice age, there's no carbon activity at all, but there's a 20 degree of the increase. Then why you are setting over the just a 1.5 degree driven by the carbon production by the industrial revolution? Can you explain about this?
Yeah, I think your point of view is in direct opposition to all of the world's leading scientists, all of the United Nations study, and anyone that has seriously looked at this issue. So I understand the point, but science has moved past that point of view. So I think it's widely agreed, universally agreed, that climate change is happening. There may be some dispute about the causes of climate change, but no one is disagreeing that climate change is happening. We've just had 11 months of record temperatures and 13 months of ocean heating. And again, there's an expression in the United States that we use, which is, don't believe my lying eyes. Everyone's eyes are telling them what's happening in the world, and we need to take steps to address it. Professor Kanie may have a more informed view than I do on the science, but I know you work closely with the United Nations.
Well, yeah, almost all science now, I can say, believes that there is a causal relation between human action, human activity, and climate change. And in order to keep the safe space for humanity, we have to limit the temperature rise as compared to the pre-industry level to 1.5 degrees Celsius or even 2 degrees. But the record says that we already passed 1.5 degree threshold last month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This year, for this year. Yeah.
For this year.
Yeah.
Already 1.6 degree higher than pre-industrial level. So going beyond that is quite dangerous and unpredictable phenomena could happen. So that's a danger, that's a risk that we are facing now.
Thank you both. So the key point here is definition of ESG is redefined. When I do have an interview with a numerous leader about their action about ESG, there is a wide difference of the motivation, but categorized into the 4 categories. 1, because it's a socially good things to do. Because big corporate want to do something which considers as socially responsible, because this will be enhancing your CSR and credibility. Second, by the way, this first category is called institutional theory, management science. Second pattern is it's just because of a fashionable trend. Just like fashion or song, management methodology also do have some fashion trend. And some of the people practice ESG activity because everybody else is doing. Third part is kind of like a stakeholder list. For example, in Japan case, SDG or ESG somehow focusing more on the regional development. So many of the financial institutions, for them, ESG somehow converted into developing a regional economy, which is not the case in other parts of the world. Fourth type of the ESG is some manager seriously consider ESG can be a tool to competitive edge. So try to build a competitive edge out of by being a leader in ESG. So the point here is definition of ESG is actually not a fixed one, and in the process of evolving. And we have one gentleman who is actually a most credible person to talk about definition of ESG, largely because he is the person who was attending the first ESG conference expert group meeting in 2005 under the United Nations. And let me introduce the gentleman over there, sitting over there, the Mr. Tanahashi. Yeah. Oh, so Shun, that because you don't have a mic, so can you shout bigger than the sound of a taiko sound of audience over there? What you think is, like a definition of ESG or challenge of the ESG? What are the things that you want the audience to take away about ESG? Great, thank you. So obviously that you could not hear that, but no worry at all, because I was leading how that his mouth was shaping. And actually, even before that, I already talked with him, like what he'll be talking about. So ESG was developed as an abstract concept and idea, and like a kind of concept. There is no definition or guideline of what ESG should be. So this is an evolving concept, and each local partner will be redefining the role of the ESG, correct? So that's correct, okay. So speaking about this ESG, then next, what I'd like to ask about the main session here is, now that we have challenge and the ESG, James, that you were saying climate part is the most important single element of ESG. And the Professor Kanie also agreed that the climate solution part is the most important target of the SDGs thing, right? Then James, that you say the ESG terminology is kind of fading away, and you say sustainability finance is kind of replacing the word ESG. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty simple. People understand that if they're doing things, activities, working at a company, exercising, raising their children, they have to do things that are sustainable. You can't just run a sprint if you're running a marathon. You have to plan to run 26 miles. So sustainability is an age-old concept, and in business it simply means being able to conduct your activities for a long period of time, doing it in a sustainable way. Climate is the foundational thing, because if we don't have a climate that we can all live in, everything else becomes secondary. So climate is the sine qua non, to use some Latin, that underlies everything else.
Thank you.
Well, if I tap into here, most of SDGs are interconnected. And in many parts, climate change appears. It's more about 80% of SDGs can be considered in connection to climate change. So in that sense also, climate is quite important part of thinking about sustainability. And it's also quite interesting for us living in Japan that ESG, the term itself, is not so much used in the US, but rather used sustainability because of some political connotation, which is, I think, quite an important message for us and also for people living here and also sitting here.
Thank you for raising that point. That speaking of that, James, can you explain to the audience here how the ESG, US version of the ESG is different from Japanese version of the ESG?
Well, I don't think it's different necessarily. I think that in the US, ESG means the same thing ESG means in Japan. I think the emphasis on the US has shifted to be sustainability. I think that same process, and Dr. Kanie should comment, I think that same process is happening in Japan. as all of these phenomenon that we're seeing in the natural world happen, of course, in Japan, just like they do in the United States, just like they do in South America and other parts of the world. So I think everyone is moving towards this concept of sustainability. That doesn't mean aspects of ESG, like diversity, like equity, are not incredibly important. They are incredibly important. But if your house is on fire, you don't debate which souvenirs do I take first, which book do I want. You say, I need to get out of the house and stop it from burning. Climate is that issue today. Climate is the burning house issue. And that's what we have to address.
Thank you, James. So this is the end of the part one of this session. So we now want, lesson learned is the concept and terminology of ESGs, more shifting toward sustainability. Then session two, will be more talking about what comes next beyond SDG and ESG. Professor Kanie has been advising United Nations and Japanese government for the new policy for the sustainability development goal. And Professor Kanie will be talking about what comes next in terms of the policy and the implication for the businesses as well. So, Professor, please go ahead for the next slide. Yeah.
Well, it's a quite difficult question because so many unpredictable things will happen, and also we can also expect that so many unpredicted things will be happening in the future, especially when we are going into the era of climate change. But nevertheless, that also has an implication that we need transformation. We have to transform quickly because the situation is bad. You have to move quickly so that we are not living in the burning house, but we can get away from it, or we can reduce the fire or even eliminate the fire. And this is what we discussed in the Global Sustainable Development Report last year. For transformation, there are a bunch of studies talking about transformation. And we look at all of those existing studies and came up with this one model that may capture all the different studies that shows the tendency for transformation. And transformation could be divided into three different phases, which is emergence phase, acceleration, and stabilization. Things that are exhibited here may be focusing on the emergence phase. Lots of things are emerging, and lots of startups are needed. New actions are required, but that has to be accelerated at some point. And acceleration may be occurring in terms of policy push, or in terms of making market, or SNS may help accelerating actions. But finally, that has to be stabilized in order to build into the society. So those three phases are necessary. That's what many studies show. Of course, things cannot be following these models, but this could be one conceptual model that we came up with. At the same time, decline of the existing system has to also take place. That's a red line. Of course, at the beginning, there are levers for transformation, but also there are many impediments for transformation. So things are not going smoothly, but when it comes to tipping point, then it goes down and it breaks down drastically and going towards phasing out. So these are considered the three different phases for transformation. That is what we think is important to be happening in the next years.
Thank you. So that in order to accelerate the shift phase, and you say the acceleration phase that we are getting into, you are the close advisor to the Japanese government, and the entrepreneur and corporate here benefit a lot by seeing the political direction or policy direction so that we will be well prepared for the shift. So the Professor Kanie, let us ask you, what kind of policy that the Japanese government is providing to enhance this acceleration, or what kind of policy that you are advising to the government, which we should know about?
Well, we also in this study looked at the existing models and scenarios toward 2030. No scenario, unfortunately, suggests that SDG could be achieved by 2030. There's one very positive scenario that shows that most of SDG could be achieved in 2050. And in that scenario, there are some key shifts are required, they said. And for example, in the case of sustainable and just economies, as shown here, rollout of good practice climate policies and global carbon pricing are necessary in order to facilitate actions even in achieving most of SDGs in 2050. So many actions and many policy backups are required. Encouraging life cycles that promote sufficiency levels is also another shift that is required to change the course of action. Investment in green innovation and circular and sharing economy models are another important issue that we consider is important in order to achieve sustainability goals.
I got it. So, and Professor, because for the interest of the time, because we have to have 10 minutes for the James to talk about actual financial investment opportunity down there. But before moving to that session, that give us a final slide, like a next page. Okay, so you skipped that the Japan thing. So okay, so yeah. Oh, in terms of the SDG push policy, right? That you were saying that SDG push is needed now, and I remember in reading at your article and your activity in government, you are now big, a proponent of carbon market or carbon price market required in Japan. Can you explain why do you think this is one of the most important topic for the Japanese government or policymaker for creating this change?
Well, because there's no market. We need a market in order to accelerate actions of people and also in order to change the mindset of people. I mean, we have to think that carbon is expensive, emission is expensive, and that requires carbon pricing and creating carbon market. And if carbon is associated with current way of thinking economies, then we suddenly could consider climate change is very, very costly, and for our own interest, we need to pay attention to climate change. So that's why I think carbon pricing is important and also important message to the public.
So thank you, Professor. Then let us move to the last part of this session. So now we have learned, out of SDG and ESG, climate is a more pressing issue. Out of climate, then carbon reduction is a rising theme and most part of where business is going. Here we have a gentleman who is making an investment activity around climate solution fund with the theme of carbon reduction. So James, can you explain about what kind of actual investment opportunity and also implication for the company here, policymaker here, to prepare ourselves for the rising trend?
Yeah. I can, so if this slide is really for all of the young people in the audience. I used to be a young person as well, if you can believe that. If it was 1990 and you were in a talk like this and someone showed you the chart on the far left, you would see one technology company on that list and you'd see lots of other companies there. And if at the talk the person said to you, you should devote your career to digital technology, you would look at this chart and wonder why. There's only one company, it's kind of an old company, IBM. Why should I go into digital? Doesn't make sense to me. If you look right to the right, what's happened? Every leading company by market cap in the world, every leading company is a digital technology company. Every single one. That change happened in a very short period of time. The other thing that you may see on the chart is obviously the size of the market grew incredibly quickly. If all you had done was to dedicate your life to building a business or working in the field of digital technology, you would have done very well. Climate is the same thing for the next 30 years. Climate is going to be the single biggest investment opportunity, single biggest business opportunity, single business technology opportunity, and there are some very interesting companies out here that are in that area. So I would just leave you with one point. If you're a young person, it's going to be your problem, but it's also your opportunity. Climate is going to be the single biggest changing force over the next 3 decades. And you should really think about how do you get knowledge, expertise, or staple yourself to those changes, because the expression, of course, a rising tide lifts all boats. You can be one of those boats as the carbon markets, decarbonization, energy transition grows. On the very right are some numbers. The numbers are highly speculative. These are McKinsey numbers, which is a very good global consulting firm, and the size of spending is staggering, approaching $300 trillion over the next several decades. That's an extraordinary amount of money. This is a little bit of a self-serving slide. This is where we are focusing as investors. I also happen to think it's the most interesting area to focus, but there are other interesting areas to focus on as well. In the investment world, you really have 3 types of investments that you can make on the private side. You can make venture capital investments, which is all the way to the left. You can make investments in growing companies, helping them get bigger, going from 20 million to 200 million, or you can make buyout or private equity investments. We think the area in the middle is very interesting because, as Professor Kanie said, and as people know, the world, according to the United Nations scientists, the world needs to reduce its emissions by 43% in the next 6 years. There is no way that that's going to happen. Absolutely no way that that's going to happen. We then have to get to zero, net zero, which is actually not absolute zero, it's net zero. There's emissions that are taken out of the atmosphere by 2050. 2050 is not that long away. It may seem like a long time away, it's not very long away. So scaling these businesses very rapidly is going to be absolutely critical, and it's a wonderful investment opportunity. We think it's also a wonderful opportunity to help change the world. And so you're doing good and doing well at the same time. I'll just talk about this very quickly because I think we'll run out of time. These are 4 areas that are going to transform over the next several years. Obviously, it covers a lot of ground, but just to touch on them very briefly, the way that we make buildings, build buildings, has got to change. Concrete uses an extraordinary amount of energy just in making the cement, the process of making cement. That has to change. The way that we heat and provide electricity and run lighting in buildings and cool buildings has got to change. So buildings are an enormous opportunity for change and an enormous opportunity for investment. Food, there are again some really interesting companies out there. We are degrading the soil, we're cutting down too many trees, and we need to think about how we're going to grow things in a warming world. So all of the ways that food is produced, stored, managed, tracked is going to change. Energy, I think, is self-explanatory given the trends around solar and wind and hydro. And then carbon, as Professor Kanie said, there are probably some economists or people who've studied economics in the room. Carbon is one of the biggest externalities in the economy right now. It has tremendous costs, but those costs are not captured anywhere. And you're seeing regulators now saying companies need to identify the amount of emissions. They need to start thinking about paying for those emissions through carbon markets. In the United States, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which governs all public companies, is requiring companies to do carbon emissions disclosure. Every company is going to have to do that. Stockholders are saying if you have assets that are exposed to climate change, let's say you owned a house in Miami Beach, you should be thinking about, is that house in Miami Beach going to be around in 10 years? Because sea levels are projected to rise. So those sorts of things are starting to become part of the everyday conversation among investors. I'll skip this quickly. The main point is on the left. Look at the growth of venture capital going into climate technologies. That's an extraordinary change. It's only going to get steeper, and it means there'll be lots of really interesting companies that are being generated over the next few years. I won't give you the Investcorp commercial. I hope they don't take my business card away for not doing that, but we're an old firm. And then here's some things if you're interested. We have done some writing on this topic. The one on the far right is probably the best introduction, Disruption and Transformation, but it goes through some of what we believe is happening right now in terms of new business formation and investment opportunity.
Well, thank you, James. This is a pretty interesting piece of presentation, but I have a few questions. First of all, can I have this so that I can show the slide? Okay, so this is not working for me, but no worry that we still remember the slide. So please imagine what we saw just a few minutes ago. Speaking of the massive capital inflow to the theme, 300 trillion US dollar, that's a big number. And yeah, thanks for your wish. The miracle happened, then this come back here. $300 million. Imagine how big it is. Okay, so just give you an example. This is 3 times bigger, 3 times the size of the world GDP. And also 70 times bigger, 70, than Japanese GDP, a massive amount of capital. And looking at the name, you have mentioned GAFA and Microsoft. Then climate solution version of this company will be coming out from this crowd, right? Then my question here, do you think the climate giant will be also coming from the same place of tech giant? Like, namely, do you think they all coming from US? And another related question is how Japanese company or government is big part of this trend? Are they lagging behind or they are doing something active? What like a Japanese company can benchmark out of this activity? Right.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I'll answer it briefly, and I think Professor Kanie will have a more informed view than I do. Every time there's a new transition, there's new leaders, right? You just look at throughout history, in all these transitions, there's new leaders. So there will be new leaders here. Right now, there is still a lot of innovation that comes out of the United States and Western Europe, but you're seeing China lead, of course, in solar panels, starting to lead in electric vehicles. Japan, if you look at Toyota and the Prius really put the electric vehicle transition on the map. It was the most successful hybrid ever. It wasn't the first, but the most successful. So I think the Japanese conglomerates have an enormous role to play. They're starting to play that already in some new technologies. I think Japan, and I'll use this as transition to hand over to Professor Kanie, but if you look at what has distinguished Japan, I think, throughout history, Japan, the Japanese culture has always revered nature. It's always had a very tight integration with nature, going back to Shintoism, going back to the parks in Tokyo. That ethic, that mindset is going to be absolutely critical in this next phase that we're entering. And it really gives Japan, I think, a very interesting place in the race, if you will. If you look around, you can see what Tokyo's doing, which is very impressive in this space. So already you're seeing leadership, I think, Moogwi, out of Japan and out of Tokyo.
Well, we have problems at the global level. So we have to set the goals at the global level, target at the global level, but action should be at the local level. So it has to be contextualized into the local context. Local context include local government, but not only local government, but also companies and also local behavioral patterns. So that's also one of the things that we came up with in the UN report. Solution has to be really locally cultivated. So that's one key message that we came up with. Also, I think James uses a lot of the term opportunities rather than risks. I think people in Japan, especially who are working on sustainability, ESG business, consider ESG as a risk management. But it's not risk, just risk. As you can see here, it's an opportunity. It's a great opportunity lying in front of us. It may start from climate change, but it could be linked to the biodiversity or pollution alleviation or many other issues, food, drinks, and so on. So there are many, many opportunities. So I think we have to change our mindset from risk to business opportunity here.
Thank you, Professor. So like we see opportunity for Japanese company as well to ride on the tide of big climate solution opportunity, and potentially there will be some Japanese giant coming from like a climate solution that the market. And so you say, James, that you also consider to looking for investment opportunity to Japan. Why you think there will be an interesting opportunity to invest in Japan for the climate solution thing? And another question I would ask is, these days a lot of asset managers do have an ESG fund or sustainability fund. And there's a number of the names who establish fundraising. My question related here is, James, why that we believe that you are the right person to ask investment to taking care of a climate solution opportunity? Why you think that you will be a good position?
Why would I be?
Yeah, it's a good position to capture this opportunity. You are running one of the major fund in climate solution area, right? So can you tell a little bit about?
Yeah, I've been doing investing for a long time, but I don't want to give my own commercial here. I think that I'm going to change the question, Moogwi.
Yep.
Because we're running out of time. I think this is the biggest single opportunity. I'm pursuing it. It's all I think about. Maybe you can tell that from my remarks. But also, I have 3 children. I have 3 boys who are all at working age. And I've told them, you need to focus on it. And they are focusing on it, and they were interested before. It can be sometimes daunting when you look at the news stories about climate. But I'm convinced also that we're going to fix it. We're going to fix it, and the world will be a better place. Imagine driving around with no combustion coming out of the back of cars. Imagine the changes in pollution. Imagine all of that. That's the world that again, the younger people in the audience are going to build, and it's going to be a wonderful world. So it's all going to get fixed. It's going to be hard work, but as Professor Kanie said, it's going to be an amazing opportunity as well for people that go into it.
Yeah.
Well, James mentioned earlier that what happened in digital technology in early 1990s is now taking place on climate. That's also, I really, really agree with it. I have a colleague who is considered as father of internet in Japan. His name is Jun Murai, my colleague at my university. I always talk to him about what should be doing in the future. And he said what was happening in internet in early 1990 when I was his student is now happening in the area of sustainability. And that's why he's interested in sustainability, because internet could also be benefited from sustainability, and internet could go anywhere, but so long as it's associated with sustainability, it has a future. And that's why I'm very closely collaborating with him. So yeah, I think he's right.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Professor Kanie, and thank you, James. So like biggest single takeaway today is, we are in the gate of massive opportunity for climate solution opportunity, as big as the size of the internet growth market transformation. And there is a potential that the next unicorn or like a gigacorn do potentially come from our market in Japan. And hopefully we can work together to let's make this happen. Thank you for listening today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.